Welcome to the Coaching Index podcast. Honest conversations between coaches, practical insights, knowledge, ideas, impact.
Welcome back to Coaching Questions. This is episode 2, and today I want to talk about something that I think almost every coach has dealt with at some point: playing time. And more specifically, this question: does every player deserve playing time? Because I think this is one of those topics where everyone has an opinion. Players have an opinion, parents definitely have an opinion, and coaches have to be the ones who actually make the decision. But I think sometimes we simplify the conversation too much. We say things like, you have to earn your minutes, the best players play, playing time isn't guaranteed, and I understand all of those statements. I've probably said versions of them myself. But I think there's a bigger question underneath all of this. What does fair actually look like when it comes to playing time? Because fair doesn't necessarily mean equal, but fair also can't simply mean I'm the coach, so I decide. So that's what I want to get into today. One of the most common phrases in sports is, you have to earn your playing time. Okay, but how? What exactly does the player have to do? Is it based on performance in training, game performance, attitude, attendance, tactical understanding or physical ability, the position they play, how they compare to another player? Because if we're going to tell players they have to earn something, I think we have a responsibility to help them understand how to earn it. And that's where I think coaches sometimes get it wrong. A player comes to every practice. They work really hard. They do everything asked of them. Then the weekend comes and they play 5 minutes, or they don't play at all. After the game, they ask, "Coach, what do I need to do to play more?" And the answer is, just keep working hard. I don't think that's enough. Because what does that actually tell them? They're already thinking that they're working hard. So now what? If a player isn't playing because they need to defend better, tell them that. If they need to improve their decision making, tell them. If another player is simply performing better right now, we can have that conversation too. It might be uncomfortable, but at least it's honest. Fair doesn't always mean equal. This is probably the biggest distinction I want to make. Fair playing time and equal playing time are not necessarily the same thing, and the environment matters. If I'm coaching very young players in a developmental environment, my approach to playing time is going to be very different from coaching a high school varsity playoff game. The purpose of the environment matters. The age matters. The level matters. The competition matters. But regardless of the environment, I think players deserve clarity. You might have 18 players on your roster. You might generally believe every one of those players has an important role on the team. But that doesn't mean all 18 players are going to play the exact same number of minutes. And I don't think we should pretend that they will. The problem starts when our messaging says one thing and our decisions say another. If we're telling players everybody is important, but there are players who barely see the field, never receive feedback, and don't know what they need to improve, eventually they're going to question whether we actually mean it. And that's not really a playing time problem anymore. That's a communication problem. So, here's where this gets difficult. Think about the player who does everything right. They're at every practice, they're a great teammate, they work really hard, they're coachable and they're positive, they don't cause problems, but they're just not currently one of your best players. What do we do with that player? Because sometimes, especially in competitive environments, another player is simply better. That's reality. And as coaches, we're responsible for putting teams in positions to compete, but we're also responsible for developing the people sitting on the bench. I think that's where we have to challenge ourselves, because it's very easy to coach the players who play 70 or 80 minutes. You're constantly talking to them, you're correcting them, you're encouraging them. They're getting the experience. They're getting opportunities to make mistakes and learn from them. But what about the player getting 8 minutes? How are they developing? What feedback are they receiving? What opportunity are we giving them to eventually become the player who gets 30 minutes? Because if our answer is simply they need to get better, we have to remember something. We're the coach. Helping them get better is our part of the job. I think we sometimes forget that playing time itself communicates something, even if we don't say a word. When you consistently start someone, you're communicating something. When you substitute someone after every mistake, you're communicating something. When a player has a great week of training and still doesn't get an opportunity, you're communicating something. And when someone barely plays for 3 straight games and you never speak to them about it, you're communicating something. The problem is that the player gets to decide what the message means. Maybe they think, coach doesn't trust me, I'm not good enough. It doesn't matter what I do at practice. Coach already has their favorites, and maybe none of that is true. But if we haven't communicated with them, we've left them to fill in the blanks. That's dangerous, especially with our young athletes. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make with playing time is waiting until someone is upset before we talk about it. The player isn't playing, the player gets frustrated, they go home, the parent gets frustrated, then we receive the email, and now everyone is emotional. What if we had the conversation earlier? What if we noticed that a player's role was changing and spoke to them before they had come to us? Something as simple as, hey, I know your minutes have been down the last couple of games. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what you're doing well, and here's what I need to see from you to get back into the game more. That's coaching. Now the player has direction. They might not like the answer, but at least they have an answer. And I think that's an important distinction. Our job isn't to make every player happy with every decision. That's impossible. Our job is to make sure our decisions have thought behind them and that we're willing to communicate those decisions. Should players have to ask us? This is something I've thought about a lot. We often tell players, if you want to know why you're not playing, come talk to me. And I do think players should learn to advocate for themselves. That's an important skill. But I always wonder, why should the responsibility always be on the player, especially with younger athletes? Some players will walk straight into your office and ask, why am I not starting? Other players will never do that. Not because they don't care. They might be nervous. They might not know how to approach you. They might think asking will make things worse. So I think coaches have to know their players. Sometimes leadership means opening the conversation yourself. So, I think you know where this is going. What about parents? We can't talk about playing time without talking about parents. And this is where things can get quickly difficult. A parent sees their kid differently than we do. And that's completely understandable. That's their child. They're watching one player. We're trying to watch an entire team. But I also don't think our response should automatically be, parents don't understand. Sometimes they might actually have a reasonable question. The key for me is how these conversations happen. I would much rather teach players to communicate with their coach first, especially as they get older. If a player is unhappy with their role, let's help them have that conversation. What can I improve? What are you seeing? What do I need to do to earn more opportunities? Those are incredibly valuable conversations for young people to learn how to have. And as coaches, we have to create an environment where players feel safe enough to ask those questions, because consistency matters. Another huge part of fairness is consistency. If being late affects one player's playing time, it probably needs to affect another player's playing time too. If missing practice matters for your substitute, it should probably matter for your star player. If attitude is part of how you make decisions, that standard can't suddenly disappear when you need someone to win a game. Players notice those things, maybe more than you realize, and that's where accusations of favorites often begin. Not necessarily because everybody isn't playing equally, but because players don't understand, while different rules seem to apply to different people. Fairness isn't giving everyone the same thing. Sometimes fairness is having clear standards and applying them consistently. So, here's the hardest part of coaching. I think one of the hardest things about coaching is knowing that sometimes you're going to make a decision that hurts someone's feelings. You might not start someone. You might substitute someone. You might leave someone out of a squad. You might choose another player in a big moment. That's part of coaching. We shouldn't avoid difficult decisions just because they're uncomfortable. But we also shouldn't hide behind that sports, because there's still a human being on the other side of that decision. A player who trained all week, a player who cares, a player who wants to contribute. We can make competitive decisions and still have empathy. Those two things aren't opposites. So here's my challenge to coaches. Think about the player on your team who is currently playing the least amount of time. Not your starter, not your captain, not the player scoring all the goals, but the player sitting towards the end of your bench. And ask yourself, do they know why? Do they know what they're willing to do better? Do they know what they need to improve? Do they know what their pathway to more playing time looks like? And maybe most importantly, have you actually told them? Because if they don't know, we can't expect them to figure it out for themselves. So, does every player deserve playing time? I don't think there's one answer that works for every age, every level, and every environment. And I don't think equal minutes automatically means you're being fair. but I do believe every player deserves something. They deserve honesty, they deserve communication, they deserve feedback. They deserve to understand where they stand, and they deserve to feel like their coach is still invested in their development even when they're not in the starting 11. Sometimes the easiest part of coaching is deciding who plays. The harder part is communicating with the player who doesn't, and maybe that's where the real coaching happens. So I'll leave you with this week's coaching question. If a player asked you right now why they aren't playing more, could you give them a clear, honest, and helpful answer? And if you couldn't, maybe that's the conversation you need to have before the next game. Thanks for listening to this Coaching Questions. I'll see you for the next one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaches Conversations, presented by the Coaching Index. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a coach, parent, or player who may benefit from it. For more coaching insights, resources, articles, and future conversations, follow us on Instagram at the Coaching Index. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep making an impact.